Yeah, good morning. I'm Madam Nyangesa. Welcome to our English lesson today. Last week I talked of changing passive voice to active voice, and then I taught a speech in composition. But in our lesson today, we are going to talk about comparison of adjectives. Previously, I taught adjectives, and then when I taught adjectives, I was talking of order of adjectives. Well, when more than one adjective has been used to describe a noun, then there is need for the arrangement. We came up with what? An acronym that was common, and then people were supposed to arrange to describe the nouns according to the order. But in our lesson today, we are going to talk about comparison of adjectives. And we all know adjectives are words that are used to describe nouns. Now, they can describe things, adjectives can describe things, can describe places, or they can describe people. So when you are describing two things, we have what we call the comparative degree of the adjective. And then when you are describing more than two people, two things, two places, or two people, we have what we call the superlative form of the adjective. Now, example in a sentence, I'm going to say, Anne is tall. Anne is tall. This is the positive degree of an adjective. And then I'm going to say Anne is taller. Anne is taller than Amina. Then I'm having taller, which gives me the comparative form of the adjective. And then I'm going to say Anne is the tallest. Anne is the tallest of all girls in the class. Why? When you're talking about more than two things, then you use the superlative form of the adjective. That's why I say girls in the class. A class has more than 10 or let's say 5 pupils who are girls. Now, we are going to go down and talk of the comparative degree of an adjective, then the superlative degree of an adjective. But when we are talking about just one noun, then we use what we call the positive degree of an adjective. So we are going to talk of the comparative degree of an adjective. The comparative degree of an adjective is used to compare two things. It's used to compare one thing to another. One thing, one person, or one place to another. Now, for shorter adjectives, ER, but for longer adjectives, for shorter adjectives, you are going to add ER. But for those that are longer adjectives, then you are going to add, then we are going to use more in the comparative degree. And then when I say for longer adjectives, I mean those adjectives that either end with full, or those adjectives that also end with OUS. These ones take what? More in their comparative degree. Example, in a sentence for shorter adjectives, I'm going to come up with, in the positive degree, I'm having big. In the comparative degree, I'm having bigger. So in my comparative degree, I added an ER and ER. Just remember, in the comparative degree, we are comparing two things, two places, or two people. So I'm going to say bigger, but let's say, for example, I have handsome. The word is handsome. In the comparative degree, the adjective is handsome. In the comparative degree, I'm going to say more handsome. Now, I say if an adjective ends with an FU, a full, an FUL, or an adjective ends with an OUS, then it takes more in its comparative. So, example in a sentence, I'm having curious. So, in my comparative degree, I'm going to say more curious. Let's have successful. Example, we have successful. And then in the comparative degree, we are going to say more successful. That is if you are comparing two things, two places, or two people. Now, how am I going to use this in a sentence? For example, in the positive degree, I'm going to say, a lion is big. A lion is big. It's big. A lion is a big animal. A lion is a big animal. But I'm going to say an elephant. I'm going to say an elephant is bigger than a lion. A lion. An elephant is bigger than a lion. A lion. And then we are going to say, which one is the biggest animal? A lion is a big animal, so it is the positive degree. And then I'm going to say an elephant is bigger than a lion. So you compare two things to their kind, like you compare animals to animals. So I'm going to say an elephant is bigger than a lion, having a lion, and then I'm having an elephant. I'm comparing two things, two animals, two things. So an elephant to a lion. If I want to compare two people, I'm going to say Amina is taller than Ayub. For example, I can say Anne is taller. For example, in a sentence, I can say Anne is taller than Ayub. Anne is taller than Ayub. So you have taller, and then you have Anne, which are people. And then you have Ayub, which is also a person. So if you are using the comparative form of an adjective, for shorter adjectives use the ER, but for longer adjectives use more in their comparative. And so you just remember, if an adjective ends with an FUL or an adjective ends with an OUS, then use more in its comparative. For example, I'm going to say, let's use S or for example, let's say Ayub. Ayub is a successful businessman. Ayub is a successful businessman. I'm having Ayub is a successful businessman. So if I want to compare the two, I'm going to say Ayub is more successful. Ayub is a more successful businessman. Ayub is a more successful businessman. Ayub is a more successful businessman than what? Than let's say Abdi. So you're having more successful. We are comparing Ayub to who? To Abdi. And the pronoun, the adjective is what? Successful. So in its comparative you add more, and you just remember this adjective is ending with an FUF and FUL. You can have other adjectives that take a more in their comparative. For example, you can have expensive. You can have attractive. You can have awkward. Takes more. Then you can have beautiful. It takes more in its comparative. And when do we use the comparative form of an adjective? When we are talking about two things, when we are comparing two things. So in case you come to a sentence, especially, or if you are asked to answer questions number 1 to 15, and then you come across, let's say than, let's say to, and then they are talking of comparison, or they say duo in that sentence, or they have used between in the sentence, then if you see than, to, duo, and between in a sentence, just make sure you go for the what? For the comparative form of the adjective. Why? Duo simply means double, and then two can have here twins. Twins are two children who are born at the same time. So you have than in a sentence. For example, Amina is dash than, and then in brackets maybe they have given you tall. Then you are going to go for the comparative form of the adjective, which is taller than Amina. So my answer is going to be taller. And you don't need to fail this. The moment you see that in a sentence, and then they are talking of comparison of adjectives, simply go for the ER form of the adjective, it's the comparative. The comparative used to talk about two things. Of the two girls who is taller, they used to in a sentence. If you see duo in a sentence, if you see between, if you see between the two girls who is taller. So if it is between, then it is what? It is two. They are talking of two things. So if you want to compare two things, or two nouns, or two places, then you are going two things, two places, or two people, then you are going to use the comparative form of the adjective, the comparative form of the adjective. Now, we go to the superlative form of the adjective, and in the superlative form of the adjective, we compare more than two things. Not plural, I said more than two things, because two is also plural. So we have what we call the superlative degree of an adjective, and in the superlative degree of an adjective, or we can say places, or where adjectives can also describe persons. Now, in the superlative degree of an adjective, it is used to describe more than two things. If I say more than two things, what does that mean? They can be three, more than two things, and they can be 3, they can be 10, they can be 1,000, they can be 40 million, whatever. So long as they are more than what? More than 2, then we are going to use the superlative degree of an adjective. Now, in the superlative degree of an adjective, those short adjectives take est. We also call it the est form of an adjective. Now, the superlative degree, we use the est for shorter what? Short adjective, for short adjectives. And then for those that are long adjectives, we use most in their superlative. Just remember, if an adjective takes more in the comparative, then it takes most in the superlative. And then if an adjective takes er in the comparative, then that adjective takes est in the what? In the superlative. Just remember that. So you have est, which is for short adjective, and then we use most for what? For those that are long adjectives. So in a sentence, we had we say bigger, big. In the comparative, we said bigger, and then in the superlative, we are going to say what? Bigger, biggest. We added est, and in the comparative, we had an er. We add an er. We can say short when we are talking about one person. When we are comparing, we are going to say shorter. And then when we are coming to the superlative form of the adjective, which is a short adjective, we are going to say what? Shortest. So we are having est. How about those long adjectives? We said if an adjective takes more in the comparative, then it is going to take most in the superlative. For example, I can say she is attractive if it's one person, and then you can say more attractive in the comparative, and then in the superlative you are going to say most attractive. Now you have more, you have attractive, then you have more attractive in the comparative, then you have most attractive in the superlative. Now you can say if an adjective takes more in the comparative, it takes most in the superlative. And this also applies to those adjectives that end with ful or oua or us. So example in a sentence we can say, for example, I can say KICC is the tallest building in Nairobi. For example, I can say KICC is the tallest building in Nairobi. Now I'm having tallest. How many buildings do you have in Nairobi? So many buildings. Now if we are talking about more than 2, because we just don't have 2 buildings in Nairobi or 2 constructions in Nairobi, then we are going to say tallest. And I can say Amina is the brightest. Amina is the brightest girl. Amina is the brightest girl of the 3. Amina is the brightest girl of the what? Of the 3. Now, there are more than 2. If it is more than 2, I'm going to use the est form of the adjective. Now, I can say Abdi is the most successful businessman in Garissa. Abdi is the most successful businessman in town. So in town, most successful. How many businessmen do we have in our town? So many businessmen. So if I want to compare Abdi to all these other businessmen, then I'm going to use the most, which is the superlative form of the adjective, because there are more than two businessmen in a town. So if you want to use the superlative form of the adjective, just check the sentence. If you see two, you know it's the comparative. If you see words like all, you see words like class. If you see words like school, maybe you see words like town. Because if at all I'm going to say who is the dash girl in the school, unless they are comparing school A to school B, unless they are comparing school A, school B, like they are very categorical, they are saying SUMEYA is farther than, let's say, Mwangaza. That if they are comparing the two schools. But if they were talking about one thing in a school, then you are going to have, let's say, school, town, or class. Then if you see words like among in a sentence, then you are going for the est, or you are going to use most in your sentence. Most for what? Those longer adjectives, and then est for what? Those short adjectives. Now, what is the rule of forming er or est form of an adjective? Most people do not know how to use when to use er, let's say for example, or they know how to write er, but do not know when to use do not know how to use it in a sentence. This is the rule. If an adjective ends with an e, you simply add an r or an st in the comparative or in the superlative. This is what I mean. For example, if my adjective is ending with an e, example, what do I have? I have an adjective. I was saying, if an adjective ends with an e, example, in the positive you have safe. So when you come to the comparative, you simply add an r. For example, it is going to be safer. And then when it comes to the superlative, you simply add an what? St. For example, it is going to be what? Safe, safer, safest. You don't add. We have nice, you have nicer, then you have nicer, nicest. You have wide, then you have wider, and then you have widest. What did I say? An adjective ends with an e, you simply add an r in the comparative and an st in the superlative. Now, number two, if an adjective ends with consonant y, you replace y with an I. And then in the comparative, you add what? An er. And then in the superlative, you are adding an ea and est. Example, you have crazy. This is the positive. In the superlative, comparative, I'm going to say crazier. What did I do? I replaced y with an e, and then I added an er. And then in the superlative, you are going to say graciest. So you have an I which replaced a Y, and then you're having an EA and EST. So if an adjective ends with a Y, you simply replace the Y with an I, and then you add ER if it is the comparative, and then you add EST if it is the superlative. And then if an adjective ends with an E, then you simply add an R in the comparative and an EST in the superlative, Now, you have that. And then we have some other adjectives which we call irregular adjectives. Why do we call them irregular adjectives? So we have here what we call irregular adjectives. Now, an irregular adjective is that adjective which does not take ER in the comparative, neither does it take EST in the superlative. They also do not take more in the comparative, and they also do not take most in the superlative. Example, you can have good, and then in the comparative you are going to say good, better. You're going to say good, better, and then in the superlative you are going to say good, better, best. And then you are having many for countable nouns in the positive, or more for uncountable nouns, and then or much for uncountable nouns, sorry. And then you have here more, and then you're having most in the superlative. You have bad, you have worse, and then you have worst. In the superlative, worse in the positive, in the comparative. Let's say this is the adjective, this is the comparative, then this is the superlative. So you have good, better, best, many for countable nouns, more and most. Or you can have much for uncountable nouns, and then have more and most. And then you can have bad, worse, and then what? Bad, worse, and worst. You can have little, you can have less, and then you can have least. So these ones are what we call irregular adjectives. Or you can have, if you are ill, for example, ill, or we say sick, and then you can have worse, and then you can have what? Worst. So if you have these, the adjectives that do not take an ER or an EST in their an ER in their comparative and an EST in their superlative, is what we call irregular adjectives. For example, I'll say today is a good day. Today is a good. Today is a good day. Good is my adjective. I'll say today is better. Today is better than yesterday. So what am I comparing? I'm comparing today and yesterday. 2 days in my. And then I can say Thursday, for example, Thursday is the best day of the week. Is the best day of the week. Or today is the best day of the week. Now, I'm having best day of the week. A week has how many days? A week has 7 days. A week has 7 days. So you're having best. She's ill. Somebody is ill. Amina is ill. She's worse than yesterday. Or we say she's worse than today is worse than all the days. You can say today is a bad day. Today is a bad day. And then you say today is worse than yesterday. Or you can say Wednesday is the worst day of the week. It's the worst day of the week. These are what we call irregular adjectives. Just remember, when you use a more in a sentence, you can't use an ER. Example, you can't say more. You can't say, let's say, more safer, or you can't say more bigger, because they both mean the same. They are all comparative. So this one is wrong. This one is wrong. You can't use more and then you have an ER in the same sentence. I'm going to post an exercise. Just make sure you attempt. If you don't understand, you ask.